When we talk about truly moving someone through intimacy so deeply that they're brought to tears, we're not really talking about technique, at least not at first. We're talking about something far more fundamental and often far more elusive emotional connection. And this isn't some romantic fluff we sprinkle on top of physicality to make it seem less primal. Emotional connection is the foundation. It's the doorway through which real pleasure enters, not just physical pleasure, but the kind that unravels defenses, releases tension, and allows someone to feel utterly known and safe. The mistake most people make, especially men, is starting from the outside in. They think if they can perfect a set of moves or memorize a sequence, they'll unlock something transcendent. But in reality, human intimacy doesn't respond to choreography, it responds to presence. And you can't be present with someone truly attuned to her if you're not emotionally connected. You need to know her, not just in the she likes her neck kissed kind of way, but in the what makes her heart feel soft kind of way. That takes curiosity, and curiosity requires humility. You have to be willing to admit you don't fully know her yet, and that getting close to her mentally, emotionally, spiritually is a process, not a conquest. You have to drop the ego. You have to listen, not just when she's talking, but when she's silent. Pay attention to what changes her energy, what brings her out, what makes her guard go up. These are clues. They are sacred, and they require you to be still enough and conscious enough to catch them. A woman cannot open fully to someone who isn't paying attention. Her body follows her psyche. If she feels unseen, unheard, or subtly judged, she'll tighten. She may perform, she may even please you. But that's not surrender. That's survival if you want the kind of intimacy that cracks her open, that leaves her breathless and shaken, not just by sensation, but by emotion. You need to start long before you ever touch her. You build that in the way you speak to her, the way you listen without interrupting, the way you honor her experience as if it has weight, because it does. And yes, this requires vulnerability from you too. You don't get to be emotionally closed off and expect her to open. You don't get to withhold your presence and demand her surrender. Emotional connection is mutual. You show up, you offer yourself, not your RA summe, not your masculinity, not your sexual confidence, but you. The parts of you that are present, soft, attentive, and fully engaged. Because that's the version of you she'll respond to with her full self. When she feels safe, not just physically, but emotionally, everything changes. Her nervous system relaxes. Her breath slows. Her body becomes more responsive, and her heart becomes more accessible. That's when you start touching something real, not just in her, but in you. That's when intimacy stops being about sex and starts being about connection. You begin to feel that you're not just with someone, you're with her. And she's with you. Not pretending, not performing, not protecting, just being. This is what sets the stage for the kind of experience that stays with her, not just in her body, but in her memory. Because you didn't just touch her, you reached her. And that's where you start, not with how good you are in bed, but with how real you're willing to be before the bed even enters the picture. Let that land. Because no technique in the world will matter if she doesn't feel safe with you. If you want to make love in a way that genuinely moves a woman, touches her deeply enough that her body responds not just with pleasure, but with emotion, you have to understand one fundamental truth. The body doesn't open without the mind feeling safe. And the mind won't feel safe without emotional connection. This isn't just a poetic idea. It's neurological, psychological, and profoundly human. We're wired for connection. At a biological level, oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, is released not only during orgasm, but even during trust, building moments like eye contact or honest conversation. Her body is listening long before your hands touch her. It listens through how you look at her, how you speak to her, whether you rush her or meet her, whether she feels like she can be or whether she feels like she has to perform. If you skip emotional connection, you're not seducing her, you're bypassing her. And here's the thing, emotional connection doesn't mean asking how her day went and nodding at the right moments. It's not performative empathy. It's not being sensitive because you think it will get you laid. Emotional connection is about attunement. It's about presence. And it's about a willingness to set aside your agenda, your ego, your expectations, and actually meet her as a full, complex, intelligent, emotionally rich human being. That takes time. It takes patience. But more than that, it takes courage. Because to be emotionally connected to someone, you have to be emotionally available yourself. You have to stop hiding behind control or coolness. You have to let yourself feel, too. If you're asking her to surrender to you, emotionally, physically, you better be someone who knows how to hold that surrender with reverence. Otherwise, what you're asking for isn't connection, it's consumption. A woman can feel the difference between being wanted and being worshipped. And no, worship here isn't about putting her on a pedestal. It's about seeing her clearly, meeting her with reverence, and recognizing that the act of loving her is also an act of allowing yourself to be known. When you do that, when you approach intimacy with that kind of presence and depth, you stop trying to get anything. You're no longer trying to win her over. You're simply with her completely. And that changes everything. Her body will respond to emotional safety the way a flower responds to sunlight, not immediately, but inevitably. And when she opens, not just physically, but emotionally, you'll find yourself in a kind of intimacy that no technique or trick can simulate. Her vulnerability becomes a form of beauty. Her pleasure becomes more than arousal. It becomes a form of release. And yes, sometimes that release comes in the form of tears, not because she's sad, not because you've broken her down, but because you've held her so completely with such clarity and care that she finally feels like she can let go. And in that moment, you're not just a lover, you're a mirror, a grounding presence, a witness. You've helped her come back to herself in a way that feels both ancient and electric. That's what emotional connection makes possible. That's what opens the door to the kind of sex that transcends the physical and becomes something more intimate, more real, more sacred. So if you take nothing else from this, remember this: a woman will give you her body when she trusts you. But she will give you herself when she feels safe. That is the real beginning. And everything extraordinary flows from there. If emotional connection is the foundation, then the environment you create around it is the container that allows it to thrive. Too often, people think of setting the mood as a playlist, some dim lighting, maybe clean sheets. And sure, those things matter, but they're surface level. What really sets the mood, what actually opens the nervous system and invites someone to soften, is atmosphere. And atmosphere is not about decoration. It's about emotional tone. It's about safety. Not safety in the cliched or obligatory sense, but something deeper, the unspoken assurance that this is a space where she won't be judged, rushed, or reduced. A woman's body isn't a switch. It's an instrument, and instruments respond to environment. The moment she enters your space, physically or energetically, she's sensing everything. Her nervous system is reading the room, not just the room with four walls, but the emotional room. Is this a space of pressure, expectation? Are there unspoken demands floating beneath the surface? Or is this a space of patience, invitation, permission? Creating a safe space means removing any sense of performance. She doesn't need to be sexy or wild or emotionally open on your timeline. What she needs is room to be. And you're the one who creates that room, not just with your words, but with your energy. If you're anxious, trying to prove something, or subtly checking off a script in your head, she'll feel that. And instead of relaxing, she'll brace. She may not even realize she's doing it, but something in her will stay guarded. And here's the truth most people miss. A guarded woman can still say yes. She can still participate. She can still enjoy it. But that's not the same as being open. Full-bodied surrender doesn't come from arousal alone. It comes from trust. And trust lives in the environment. When she knows there's no pressure to perform, no consequences for saying no, and no expectations she has to fulfill, she will naturally begin to open. Not because she's been seduced into it, but because the space you've created allows her to feel free. And freedom is the ultimate aphrodisiac. This isn't about being passive or deferring to her at every turn. It's about presence, active listening, mutual respect. It's about showing her through your stillness, your tone, your attention, that you're here and you're not going anywhere, that this is not a transaction, that her pleasure, her pace, and her boundaries are not obstacles to overcome, but elements to honor. You are not trying to get somewhere. You are holding space. That's an entirely different orientation. It's not just about what you do. It's about how you do it. Are you meeting her with care or trying to manage her experience? Are you with her or are you focused on the outcome? She can feel the difference and it will shape everything that happens next. The irony is that when you let go of control, when you stop trying to create a specific outcome and instead focus on creating the conditions for connection, things tend to unfold in ways that are far more powerful, more intimate, and more unforgettable than anything you could plan. Because now you're not just creating a scene, you're creating space for her to fully arrive. And when she fully arrives, she brings all of herself, her mind, her body, her emotions, her truth. That's when intimacy stops being an act and becomes an experience, something lived, not performed. So remember this, she can only let go when she knows she's not being watched, graded, or guided toward a finish line. Your presence is the permission. And the space you create is what tells her you're safe here. Presence is the most underrated form of eroticism, and yet it's the most powerful. In a culture obsessed with performance, where we're constantly fed techniques, scripts, and shortcuts, it's easy to forget that what most people crave deep down is to be fully seen, not evaluated, not analyzed, seen. And presence is the gateway to that. What do I mean by presence? It's not just being physically there. Presence means your attention is undivided. It means you're not performing, not calculating, not mentally elsewhere. You're not wondering how well you're doing or whether she's impressed. You're not reaching ahead to the next moment. You're here right now with her entirely. And the body knows when that's happening. When someone is truly present with you, you feel it immediately. You relax. You open. There's a sense that nothing else matters in that moment. It's quiet, even if no words are spoken. There's an emotional stillness to it, a kind of sacred pause. And in that pause, something beautiful happens. The body stops defending and starts responding. That's why every touch matters. Not because there's a right place to touch or a perfect rhythm to master, but because your touch carries intention. When you're present, your touch says, I'm with you, I'm listening. It's not just about stimulation, it's about attunement. Are you paying attention to how her breath shifts, to the way her body tenses or melts, to the subtle shifts in rhythm that reveal what she needs, often more clearly than words? Sex isn't a routine. It's not a sequence of events to get through. It's a conversation, an ongoing dialogue between bodies, breath, energy, and feeling. And in any meaningful conversation, listening is more important than speaking. Presence how you listen. It's how you tell her without words that she doesn't need to guide you or teach you. You're already right there with her, reading what's unspoken. And this matters more than most people realize because the absence of presence, when you're distracted or secretly rushing or mentally checking off a list, creates micro fractures in trust. She may not call it out. She may not even consciously register it, but her body will know, her guard will rise, and what could have been soft becomes cautious. What could have been ecstatic becomes mechanical. That's why slowing down is not just romantic, it's strategic. Slowing down forces you to feel more, to pay closer attention. And when you feel more, you give more, not in quantity, but in quality. A single, intentional glance can do more than 100 gestures when it's rooted in presence. A kiss given with full attention, undistracted, unrushed, is more intimate than anything acrobatic or impressive. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to impress, you become unforgettable. Because most people don't know what it feels like to be with someone who's truly there. Who doesn't need to be somewhere else or be someone else? When you're present, you become a sanctuary, someone she can melt into, rather than someone she has to respond to. And when you offer that level of presence, what unfolds is not just arousal, it's emotional release. She doesn't just feel turned on, she feels held. And sometimes that kind of holding touches something deep in her, something unspoken, something she didn't even realize needed space. That's how presence becomes transformative. So if there's one thing to remember, it's this: she will not remember the specifics of what you did, but she will always remember how you made her feel. Be the person who makes her feel seen, not studied, attended to, not assessed. Because in the end, presence isn't just how you touch her, it's how you reach her. There's a fundamental misunderstanding when it comes to giving pleasure, especially in how men approach it. It's often taught as a skill set, a checklist of actions, a cause, and effect equation. Touch her here, say this, do that, and she'll respond accordingly. But real pleasure doesn't arise from formula. It arises from freedom. And the truth is, she can't be free in her pleasure if she senses that it's being monitored, measured, or managed. When you give with the expectation of return, whether it's praise, gratitude, orgasm, or approval, you're not giving. You're bargaining. And on a deep, often unconscious level, she will feel that. It may show up as tension, as a vague sense of pressure, as a quiet emotional pulling away. Because even if your hands are generous, if your energy carries an unspoken, I'm doing this so you'll do that, her body will perceive it as conditional, and conditionality kills surrender. True generosity in intimacy means learning to give for the sake of giving, not because you're trying to prove something, not because you're trying to get a result, but because your attention, your touch, your desire to give her pleasure is coming from a place of presence, reverence, and curiosity. You're not giving to get, you're giving to understand, to explore, to create a moment that is more about connection than achievement. This is where a lot of men misunderstand the deeper layers of feminine arousal. Yes, it can be wild. Yes, it can be physical and uninhibited, but at its root, feminine pleasure is deeply relational. It's about being felt, not just being touched. It's about experiencing herself through your presence, your attention, your desire, not as a means to an end, but as a celebration in and of itself. And that requires you to attune yourself, not just to her body, but to her energy. What's she responding to? What's she withdrawing from? What opens her And what causes her to disappear? These aren't things she will always explain to you. Often she can't, but she can show you if you're watching closely enough, if you're patient enough to follow her rather than trying to lead her somewhere. And this is important. Your ability to prioritize her pleasure doesn't mean you disappear or become passive. It means you're anchored enough in yourself that you don't need control in order to feel powerful. You don't need performance in order to feel desired. You don't need reciprocation in order to feel worthy. That inner stability is what allows you to truly serve her pleasure, not as an obligation or manipulation, but as an offering. And when you make it an offering, something shifts. The pressure drops. Her body starts to open, not just in response to sensation, but in response to your intention. Because what you're really doing is giving her permission to take up space in the encounter. You're telling her through every touch and breath and moment of patience, you're allowed to be here fully, loudly, quietly, however you are. And when she feels that, she lets go. That's when the experience deepens. When she stops performing and starts arriving. When she starts feeling not just the pleasure of your touch, but the safety, the appreciation, the raw, liberating joy of being wanted in a way that doesn't ask her to be anything but herself. So remember this, the most powerful kind of giving is the kind that asks for nothing in return. Because in that space of non-demand, she finally feels free to receive. There's something no one really teaches you about deep intimacy. What happens after it? Not the silence, not the cleanup, not the polite cuddling if it's offered, but the emotional residue, the shift in energy, the internal movement that lingers. And here's where most people get it wrong. They think once the physical climax is over, the experience is complete. That sex ends when the action ends. But if you've really gone somewhere together, if she's allowed herself to open, to be vulnerable, to surrender emotionally and physically, then she's not done when it's over. She's actually more exposed than ever. And this is where aftercare becomes not optional, but essential. We tend to associate aftercare with kink or BDSM context, where it's more openly acknowledged as a psychological need. But the truth is all intimacy, if it's real, creates an energetic opening. That opening is beautiful, but it's also delicate. It needs tending. Without that, what might have been a profound healing experience can turn sharp, jarring, even wounding. Not because anything was done wrong in the act itself, but because the ending lacked integration. And the nervous system feels that disconnection like a drop. Think of it this way: if someone invites you into the most sacred, tender, unguarded parts of themselves, and then you emotionally check out the moment it's done, what message does that send? Even unintentionally, it suggests that the act was the point, not the person, that the closeness was a means, not a shared state. And she'll feel that, not just intellectually, but somatically. Her body will absorb that emotional exit, and it will register as abandonment, even if you never meant it that way. Aftercare doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to be real. It means staying present, staying attuned, holding her, not because it's what good guys do, but because if you were deep inside her moments ago, you don't now get to disappear from her. Even emotionally, even energetically, that's the kind of rupture that makes women retreat, not just from you, but from themselves. It makes them associate depth with risk, softness with danger, openness with regret. But when you stay, when you remain with her, physically, emotionally, energetically, you offer a different imprint. One that says you're still safe. I'm still here. You're not alone in this experience. That's what turns sex into connection. That's what makes intimacy restorative instead of extractive. Because you're not just taking her somewhere, you're bringing her back again. Gently, intentionally without pulling away the second your desire is satisfied. And often, this is the moment she might cry, not because she's sad, but because she feels met. Because her nervous system has relaxed enough to release. Because something inside her that was bracing can finally exhale. That release isn't weakness. It's evidence that she felt free enough, safe enough, held enough to let go. And that kind of surrender is sacred. But it's also fragile. Don't rush it. Don't joke it away. Don't neutralize it because you're uncomfortable with emotion. Stay with it. Be quiet if that's what it calls for. Be still. Let the space be soft, not solved. Because the way you respond in that moment, after everything, is what tells her whether the whole thing was real or just a well-executed performance. So remember this, great sex might take skill, but unforgettable intimacy takes stewardship. What she gives you in trust, you give back in care. That's not just good practice. That's the difference between leaving a woman satisfied and leaving her transformed